To begin with, I will tell you something that may seem to have no meaning until we have developed faculties of clairvoyance. But when we think it over, we shall realize that it concerns us closely. Those who are able to commune with the dead as the result of developed clairvoyance realize why it is so difficult for human beings to know anything about the dead through direct perception. Strange as it may seem, the whole form of communication to which we are accustomed in the physical world has to be reversed when intercourse is established between the earth and the dead. In the physical world, when we speak to a human being from physical body to physical body, we know that the words come from ourselves. When the other person speaks to us, we know that the words come from him. The whole relationship is reversed when we are speaking with one who has died. The expression "when we are speaking" can truthfully be used, but the relationship is reversed. When we put a question to the dead, or say something to him, what we say comes from him, comes to us from him. He inspires in our soul what we ask him, what we say to him. And when he answers us, or says something to us, this comes out of our own soul. It is a process with which a human being in the physical world is quite unfamiliar. He feels that what he says comes out of his own being. In order to establish communication with those who have died, we must adapt ourselves to hear from them what we ourselves say, and to receive from our own soul what they answer. Thus abstractly described, the nature of the process is easy to grasp. But to become accustomed to the total reversal of the familiar form of intercourse is exceedingly difficult. The dead are always there, always among us and around us. And the fact that they are not perceived is largely due to lack of understanding of this reversed form of communication. On the physical plane, we think that when anything comes out of our soul, it comes from us. And we are far from being able to pay intimate enough attention to whether it is not, after all, being inspired in us from the spiritual environment. We prefer to connect it with experiences familiar on the physical plane, where if something comes to us from the environment, we ascribe it at once to the other person. This is the greatest error when it is a matter of intercourse with the dead. This is one of the fundamental principles of communication between the so-called living and the so-called dead. If this example helps you to realize one thing only, namely, that conditions are entirely reversed in the spiritual world, then you will have grasped a very significant concept, and one that is constantly needed by those who aspire to become conscious of the spiritual world. The concept is extremely difficult to apply in an actual individual case. For instance, in order to understand even the physical world, permeated as it is with the spiritual, it is essential to grasp this idea of complete reversal. And because modern science fails to grasp it, and it is altogether unfamiliar to ordinary consciousness, there is today no spiritual understanding of the physical world. One experiences this even with people who try very hard indeed to comprehend the world, and one is often obliged simply to accept the situation and leave it as it is. Some years ago, I was speaking to a large number of friends at a meeting in Berlin about the human physical organism, with special reference to certain ideas of Goethe. I try to explain how the head, in respect of its physical structure, can only be rightly understood when it is conceived as a complete transformation of the other part of the organism. No one was able to understand at all that a bone in the arm would have to be turned inside out like a glove in order to give rise to a skull bone. It is a difficult concept, but one cannot really understand anatomy without such pictures. I mention this in parenthesis only. What I have said today about communication with the dead is easier to understand. The phenomena I have described to you are going on all the time. All of you sitting here now are in constant communication with the dead. Only ordinary consciousness knows nothing of it because it lies in the subconscious. Clairvoyant consciousness does not initiate anything new, but merely brings to consciousness what is present all the time in the spiritual world. All of you are in constant communication with the dead. And now we will consider how this communication takes place in individual cases. When someone has died, and we are left behind, we may ask, how do I approach the one who has died, so that he is aware of me? How does he come near me again, so that I can live in him? These questions may well be asked, but they cannot be answered if we have recourse only to concepts familiar on the physical plane. On the physical plane, ordinary consciousness functions only from the time of waking until the time of falling asleep. But the other part of consciousness, which remains dim in ordinary life between falling asleep and waking, is just as important. The human being is not, properly speaking, unconscious when he is asleep. His consciousness is merely so dim that he experiences nothing. But the whole human being in waking and sleeping life must be held in mind when we are studying the connections of the human being with the spiritual world. Think of your own biography. Your reflections on the course of your life always contain interruptions. You describe only what has happened in your waking hours. Life is broken. Waking, sleeping, waking, sleeping. But you are also present while you sleep. And in studying the whole human being, both waking life and sleeping life must be taken into consideration.